Gone are the days where you had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get a decent gaming laptop. Well, not really, you kind of still have to spend a lot of money, but the days are here where you can actually get nice entry-level gaming laptops that don't necessarily break the bank, relatively anyway. Now, the configuration we have here today includes the newest HP Victus laptop. It's rocking Intel's 13500H series processor, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, RTX 4050 graphics with 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Additionally, we do have a relatively small 512 gigabyte solid state drive. We have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.3 standards on board, and this is again a 15-inch laptop. Now, given the fact that the entry-level gaming laptop market is very competitive now, especially when compared to a couple of years ago, the HP Victus has a lot to prove, and in this review we're going to see if it can live up to your expectations and also if it's a good gaming machine in general. So let's get started. In terms of packaging, the Victus has a very similar look to last year's model, meaning you have that same classic black box with the V branding. Now, once you open up the box, inside behind a ton of protective packaging, first and foremost, you will find the HP Victus itself. Now, like any other gaming laptop, you have a pretty chunky exterior here, but more on that in a quick minute. Past that, you have a tanky, massive 200-watt charging adapter. These things are starting to look more and more like PSU units themselves at this point. 200 watts is a large number. You also, of course, have the DC pin over here, and then you have the wall-mounted charging cable piece itself. And then finally, you have this document/quick start guide over here as well. In terms of overall design, the HP Victus has a very similar look to last year's model. Not a whole lot has changed here. HP still keeps a fairly symmetrical, boxy, classic reserved design versus a lot of other laptops that have more groovy or non-linear edges. However, their choice of a dramatic dark blue or performance blue color combined with some branding all over the laptop conveys the message that this is very much a gaming laptop. Now, it is worth noting the entire body is made of plastic, which is a bit of a disappointment. They could have gone with more premium materials at this price point, though it doesn't feel finicky or cheap necessarily. It is worth noting you do have a overall weight just north of 5 pounds, which is to be expected of a machine of this size. Now, starting with the top side, as you can see, you have a nice, flat, clean, textureless surface. I personally like the reserved design, though you do have plenty of branding. So you have the Victus terminology here towards the bottom center area, and then that massive V logo with the mirror-like reflective surface, which overall, again, looks quite classy in my opinion. The rear side of this laptop is one giant heat exhaust vent, which makes total sense. After all, it is a gaming laptop. Now, on the sides is where you have all the I/O ports. So on one side, you have a DC charging port, a USB-A super speed port, you also have the headphone jack, and then you also have a full-size SD card reader, which I personally very much appreciate. Now, on the other side, again, you have one more USB-A super speed port. You have a fully loaded HDMI 2.1 port. You'll also notice you have a RJ45 port here, or Ethernet jack, if you will. And then, for whatever reason, you have a non-Thunderbolt 4 USB-C port, though it's worth noting you do have power delivery as well as DisplayPort 1.4 functionality built in. At the bottom of the laptop, again, you do have a plastic surface finish. It is, of course, removable. And then you'll notice you have this larger-than-life air intake vent. Now, it's worth noting, only the right half actually gets any action, as that's where both the fans are located. HP just wants to make you feel like there's a lot of stuff going on, but again, it's just mostly for dramatic effect. Now, you will notice that on either corner, you have a speaker grill indicating this is a bottom-firing stereo speaker setup. And do not worry, we will do a sound test at the end of this video. A huge shout out to today's video partner, AOHI. If you're wondering what's inside this gorgeous and stunning looking black box, well, your curiosity is about to be satisfied. Inside here, we have a modular cable set. once you remove all the fancy packaging and unbox this piece of work, that's right, you have a bunch of fancy USB-C cables in what looks like a James Bond style suitcase. Exciting stuff. Now, first and foremost, we have this really cool cable storage piece over here. So all the cables you see here can actually go inside this rubber pallet, if you will. It's super useful. Past that, we have a spring extendable cable with two male components, both USB-C, and it serves as an extension piece. Then you also have the primary USB-C to USB-C male component here. This is the one you would connect to your accessory or device. And then you have a medium length USB-C male to female cable over here. This again is as an extension piece, if you will. And then fret not, you also have a box that has a iPhone lightning cable to USB-C male one, for those of you who might be using Apple-based accessories. With a power delivery rate of up to 240 watts with these cables, you can charge anything from a small accessory like a fan to a full-fledged USB-C based keyboard to your iPhone or any other phone for that matter. And the best part is you have this really cool indicator light that tells you the charging status. So it'll have different indicators, whether it's fast charging, normal charging, and not charging at all. Additionally, these cables are fully modular, so you can connect them in various combinations to achieve various lengths and practical use cases. It is an absolute powerhouse and is MFI certified, so it's totally safe to use with your Apple devices. If you're curious to learn more about this USB-C modular set, I will leave a link in the video description below where you can check it out. Unfolding this laptop presents you with a decent amount of palm rest space and an illusion that you have a lot more space than you actually do, and I think that's partly due to the choice of color here. You'll also notice at the center you have what I consider to be a somewhat decent trackpad. So yes, it's true that you have a plastic surface finish. However, there is a fairly contained amount of flex, nowhere as dramatic as I thought it would be, and also the clicks are pretty tactile. Now, I'm going to imagine that most of you are probably going to be using a mouse of some sorts when you're gaming, but it's good to know that you at least have a usable trackpad over here. Moving on to the keyboard, the first thing you'll notice is that you have nice large keycaps with well labeled fonts. Now, while I'm not the biggest fan of the boxy font style, it is easy to read. You'll also appreciate the fact that the keyboard is fully backlit, though unfortunately you do not get RGB lighting. There is also a full-size 10 keypad, which is great for some general productivity. And then of course you have a dedicated power button. As far as the overall typing experience goes, you have a great amount of key travel here, but I did find that it's not a very tactile keyboard. In fact, it feels a little too soft for my liking, which almost gives it a cheap feel, but some people actually appreciate that. Now, on the top side of the keyboard, you'll notice that just like their Envy series, HP has a tendency to include fake grills that are not heat exhaust vents, they're not speaker grills. HP just likes poking hole in random places sometimes. It's kind of their thing. I don't know why they do it. It doesn't look cool in my opinion, but it's there nonetheless. Just like last year, the hinge quality continues to be a problem here. You have an uncomfortable amount of screen wobble, and the laptop screen honestly shakes way too much for my liking. I do think that as long as you don't use the hinge like an absolute animal, it should survive general wear and tear, but HP should really address this problem. Now, as far as display fitting goes, you have a ridiculously fat chin at the bottom that does take away from the overall screen immersion. Thankfully, you have nice and narrow bezels on either side that give it a modern finish. And then at the top you have a respectably thin forehead, but at the center of that you have a mediocre 720p webcam. Now it is worth noting though, beggars can't be choosers because, well, companies like Asus don't even give you webcams on their gaming laptops, even in 2023. Keep in mind this is a gaming laptop, as such the display is configured to reflect that. So you have the common man's resolution, which is 1920 by 1080p. This gives you a 16:9 aspect ratio. You have a IPS panel here with some pretty good viewing angles. Additionally, you have a 9 millisecond response time, and the best part is that you have a 144 Hz refresh rate here, which I think should be the standard for all gaming laptops at this point. Now, where things do get disappointing pretty quickly is when you realize you only have 250 nits of peak brightness. That means if you are bold enough to play on this laptop in bright daylight settings or in a very well lit room, don't, because the glare will easily overcome the screen, unfortunately. Colors are even more depressing, with a 45% NTSC rating or approximately 55% sRGB. This thing has about as much color as a 90s themed office cubicle. In terms of performance, let's visit the specifications. So you've got Intel's i5-13500H series processor with 12 physical cores. You do have slightly dated DDR4 memory, though you have 16 gigabytes in a dual channel configuration. And then you have the RTX 4050 here with 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, in terms of overall performance, day-to-day activities like web browsing and word processing are obviously going to be a total breeze for this machine. More demanding activities like programming or coding, or doing 3D work or modeling on Blender, for example, are also very much possible, and in fact those programs thrive on a machine like this. Now when you really start pushing the CPU to its limit, when you start doing multi-layer 10-bit 4K video editing, you'll be happy to know that for the most part there were little to no frame drops, though I did notice once you start going beyond 4 consecutive layers, you do occasionally see a very minor drop, but again, this shouldn't be a major hindrance in any way or form, as you have enough RAM and enough processing power to keep up. Now let's talk about gaming, which is of course the main meal here. So I tested the CPU and GPU in a number of distinct ways by running games that kind of test both or different parts of this laptop. For example, for the GPU performance, I ran Doom Eternal, which is a AAA title. I'm happy to report I was able to get a consistent 120 plus frames per second at 1080p running at ultra settings. Now, technically this is a full 2 levels below the maximum setting, but it still looks really crisp, and as long as you're running this game at 1080p, you're gonna get some pretty nice FPS, and you don't see any sort of visible drops no matter what you're doing within the game. Now, I also wanted to test a balance between GPU and CPU performance, so I ran Fortnite, which kind of pushes both to a moderate degree, and running at the highest settings, you will get a consistent 100 plus frames per second. Now, you might have minor drops, but this might also be due to the network quality. Overall, again, a very smooth and consistent experience. And I also want to test games like City Skyline, which are highly CPU dependent as opposed to GPU. And I was pleasantly surprised, as using a very populated city, the simulations ran just fine. I had the highest settings possible. There was no lag, something that I did notice to some extent with the 12th generation i5 chip in the same place. So definitely some improvement on the CPU side over here. Now, generally speaking, the 16 gigabytes of RAM is pretty good, but I wish HP included DDR5 here instead, as you would have noticed a little bit of better performance across these games if that were the case. Thermals are probably the most impressive part of this machine. Under unrealistic peak loads, I only hit a maximum average surface temperature of just around 42 degrees Celsius. The more realistic sustained activities like gaming or video editing will yield you around the 37 degrees Celsius mark, which again is pretty cool for a gaming laptop. Now, in terms of fan noise, the same cannot be said, as you can hit a maximum noise level just north of 60 decibels, which is quite audible, mind you. And since you have a dual fan setup, that makes sense. So just use headphones when possible. In terms of upgradability, you basically have 2 fully upgradable DDR4 memory slots, which can be maxed out at 64 gigabytes. Additionally, you do have a pre-occupied PCIe Gen 4 NVMe slot here. It would have been nice to have an additional slot, but I guess it's better than nothing. And it's also worth noting the Wi-Fi card is swappable. You have a 70 watt hour battery. HP claims you can get 8.5 hours, but let's be honest here, if you're doing anything that's even remotely intense in terms of CPU or GPU activity, the more realistic number here is probably 4.5 hours. And if you're doing full out gaming, that number very quickly drops to about 1.5 hours. If you're lucky, just plug in your computer. Also, the sound quality here is very disappointing. Those dual speakers don't live up to much hype, so the bass is practically non-existent on them, and there's also a notable amount of distortion the minute you go above 80% audio. Here's a quick sound test for reference.
Got some pain in their life, you can see it in their eyes. They're changing at night underneath the dark skies, forced to become something darker inside. You can feel the switch, feel the shift in the tide. They keep desiring something that's more inspiring. Their brains rewiring, old thoughts they start aspiring. They're never tiring, no, now they feel the fight in them. They feel the fire sweep, take over entirely. They feel it growing, it's showing the feelings they keep overflowing.
With an approximate retail value of 1,150 US dollars, the HP Victus 15 treads somewhat close to entry-level pricing, though slightly north of that in my honest opinion. In return, you get what I consider to be a near no compromise full HD gaming machine. So if you're okay with running games at 1080p or the native resolution for this laptop, and you don't mind knowing that you might be 1 or 2 levels below the maximum setting for most modern day gaming titles, you're going to enjoy this laptop very much. It can run demanding games at really high settings, albeit not maximum, and give you really high frame rates at that. I also appreciate the fact that the laptop runs cool and for the most part avoids the issue of constant thermal throttling that we see with other gaming laptops. Now, things could have been better if they included faster memory, a slightly brighter display for example, or if they just included a more robust sound system, but in my opinion, none of these are necessarily deal breakers given that you are still close to the entry-level gaming experience. Overall, I think the HP Victus 15 specifically is definitely a laptop worth considering if you're trying to find the right balance between budget and performance. Let me know what you think of this laptop. If you already have it, I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing to this channel, liking this video. These laptops are expensive, you know, and your subscription helps secure the future of this channel. Catch you in the next one.